Welcome Dr. Raju for this lecture series on public interest litigation and public interest law for citizens. First of all, let me thank Goa Foundation for giving me this opportunity to talk to you all. It's an opportunity for me to share whatever I feel I have learned through the service period, and I would like to take you through certain provisions of law which is there, which are prevalent and being practiced in the state of Goa. And after that, I think we will have a discussion subsequently as planned. I have named it Understanding Planning and Regulatory Provisions. Though most of you understand what is planning, what is regulation, you have experienced everything what is happening around, is what is planning, and that is what is either a success or a failure of, depending on what you say, is the regulations. Now, every plan and regulation in any place has a degree of its success and some degree of unsuccessful stories also. But now, through this process, we only try to understand the state of Goa. The development control revolves around few acts. One is the Town and Country Planning Act, which you are already aware, dated 74 but amended quite some time over a period of time. The Municipalities Act of 1968, also being amended from time to time. Village Panchayat Regulations Amendment Act of 69, also amended subsequently, which also converged into Goa Panchayat Raj Act 1994. Then the City Corporation of Panaji Act 2002. These are the main acts under which the entire thing revolves around directly. Now there are some associated acts, rules and codes, like Munkar Act. We can't do anything without applying the provisions of Munkar Act during the process of planning. Similarly, Forest Act. More than 35% of Goa is said to be under forest. Now, many forest provisions are applicable directly to many plots. So we have to consider anything, whether while regulation we adopt or planning we do. Then very important act is another Tenancy Act. Then Fire Services Act, Agriculture Act, Mining Act, which is again a major act applicable to major portion. More than 30-40% of Goa covers under the Mining Act. And pollution control regulations which are there. Coastal zone regulations which came after 1985. Land Revenue Code 1968. 92 Constitutional Amendment, as you are all aware of that. These are other associated acts which are connected with the first acts which I told you where we directly deal with. Now, main aspects I would like to take you through is section 9 to 17 deals with preparation of a regional plan. As you are aware, regional plan in the state of Goa is quite popular and understood by each and everyone, I hope, to the best possible way. 44 to 45 sections deal with development permissions. Most of it is dealt by the PDAs. These 44 and 45 applies only in the PDA areas wherever the jurisdiction of planning and development authorities are there. Then goes 51 to 55. These are penal acts. Wherever unauthorized developments or construction takes place, those things are dealt under section 51 to 55. Then very important thing which touches everyone is another 49.6. Hitherto, we had 49.6 only in urban areas or PDA areas, to be more sure. But recently, I think in the last 2 years, it is being extended to the state of Goa throughout. Now, under this, any registration of sale, deeds, any other leases, everything needs to be through an NOC or a no objection certificate from the concerned authorities. Now, this regulation which I am actually discussing with you today were done in 2010. Till then we used to call red book, white book, whatever it is, but they were totally changed. I can say it's a revamping of the entire thing, which includes almost everything which is covered under central laws, the National Building Code, and many other regulations which came after 1989, where that white book was introduced.
And subsequently we have updated everything till 2011 and 12. Now what is required is to update the same thing with the new NBC which came last 2 years back. That updation is probably due for making that. Now in these regulations, I would be touching some of the important definitions which were included, which were not there earlier. Then of course the meaning of development, FAR plot, which is quite known to you all, zoning regulations, building regulations, some parking provisions which are there, public utilities, post-occupancy audit. This is something which I'm going to talk later also, because this is something which has come, which was not there in earlier acts. This is to give, I think I'll take it up later, open space provisions, hoarding regulations. This hoarding also is a new provision introduced which was not there in entire state of Goa. Now the last point of structural stability norms, which was also not seriously considered earlier, and at the moment it is one of the major aspects for getting a certificate from a qualified engineer, structural stability norms. This I'll be explaining to you in detail subsequently. Now just before going into the other thing, these are some of the codes which came in over a period of time. Energy Conservation Building Code 2006, National Building Code 5, now we have got 16, Additional Fire Safety, and BIS Code, Earthquake Mitigation. This all happened after an incident happens in something or the other, we have introduced. Like if you see what, let me also brief you. Under each category, if you see this, I have quoted the regulation, so that though I'm not going into detail of each regulation, every statement comes with a number which refers to the regulation. So similarly, this, if you wanted to see a barrier-free design, you have to refer to that. Throughout this presentation, I have given for the purpose of people to understand where to look for it, so that it becomes much easy for you to go and refer to that. Similarly, if I see, these are the definitions which are introduced new in the whole process. And some of them are like, these are the regulations like structural engineer was never defined earlier. Now by including this, the responsibility to a normal engineer and a structural engineer, because high-rise buildings requires structural engineer to design and execute that. So similarly, urban designer, of course, may not be of much significance for general public, and landscape architect. This barrier-free design was introduced under the 27(6). Similarly, we have introduced new regulations under regulation 17, how the hoardings have to be there. This is one interesting thing. Certainly some of you must be knowing, everywhere and anywhere of any size and any distance, and without maintaining distance from various roads, highways, state highways, we have hoardings put all around. But earlier there was no regulation dealing with hoardings in the state of Goa. But now regulations are in place. Everything is defined into the size, height, distance, and distance from the junctions, and what should come and what size should come in what highways or what roads, depending on the road widths. Everything is defined under that section 17. And whenever you have any difficulties dealing with this, suppose you come across something, you can rely on this section 17 to take either action or to say that yes, what should have been and what authorities are supposed to do. I feel this particular thing is not seriously taken by any local bodies or any other agencies so far. Provisions are made. Then is the green building concept, which is also under 27(12). Solar and other conservation thing also made compulsory for public buildings, hotels, and complexes above 50 units. This is also available under that regulation 1431. An energy conservation code is introduced as per BIS code. Rainwater harvesting. This was earlier given as a sort of a recommendatory process, but now this gets into the regulation so that the people concerned has to follow. The next one is that IT and ITE buildings. This was also not there in the earlier regulations. This specifies where IT and IT services can come. This was needed because of one reason, that IT and ITE services are allowed within the residential zones with certain conditions. Now, many citizens will have this kind of a difficulty, like how the IT companies can come, what kind of things. There are many industrial units working in residential areas legally or illegally. So in order to separate out what is permissible and what is not permissible, this provision for IT and IT services buildings are, services are provided in that. which does not harm or create any nuisance, either air or other pollutions. Now, disaster management. This is something which we keep on discussing and debating, but a provision was not there earlier. It is introduced now, but still there is no much attempt done for establishing some sort of disaster management units. Traditionally, we have got whatever, like under collectors, we have schools and dharmashalas and many other things. But this provision, if you adopt, linked with the regional plan, where also it provides for disaster management sites to develop in an emergency, those things are yet to be taken. And in fact, it is for the citizens to take such kind of initiatives to do that. The other highlights are like we have allowed something called basement permitted beyond the footprint. This was a provision which is provided to accommodate more parking places in multi-story buildings in the basements, and of course multi-level parking. Now this multi-level parking is not necessarily only down. Now for the first time, this also gives you multi-level parking can be provided even above the ground in any of the floors. Now, and the entire building also can be now considered under multi-level parking, apart from the basements. This was a provision which many people had difficulties in accommodating more parking. With the increase in vehicle population, there was a dire strike necessity to get into that. We have provided, though it may not be sufficient still with the speed of vehicles registration taking place in the state of Goa. Now, apart from this, I just wanted to brief you, because there is always a confusion on what is the role of TCP, PDAs, municipalities, panchayats. You know, there is some confusion in the minds of citizens, because it looks like everyone is doing the same and there is a repetition and all that. I just wanted to put things straight to say what regulations talk about the role of each one. Now, the role of TCP and the PDAs is from planning point of view. I'll be explaining that what is that little later. And then municipality, and the other one is for grant of construction license. No building is complete or legal unless you have a construction license. Merely obtaining an approval from planning point of view does not confer any right for any development to be legal, unless it also goes through the process of construction license to be obtained by the local bodies. And as far as functions are concerned, technical clearances are given by the TCP in the non-PDA areas, and PDAs gives development permission under section 44 of the Act. Now, the licensing authority in both the ways is a local body, either it's a panchayat or a local body, municipality. And for procedure, earlier there used to be a different procedure altogether. Applicants were supposed to first approach the local bodies and then get it forwarded to the respective departments. But in this, that particular system was done away with in order to cut short time and other things which were there. The planning areas, applicant can directly go make an application to PDA and then take the NOC and then go to the municipality. Similarly, in TCP areas, the applicant can directly go to TCP and then with the NOC go to the local body. This is this one which slightly changes the system which was there to come through the panchayats. There are debates on that. I won't get into that. This was all done for a purpose of reducing time spent by each applicant. Now, there is a compulsory appointment. This is very important for everyone as a public citizen to know. There is a compulsory necessity to appoint a professional, either an architect or an engineer, to execute, design a building. And the owner, it's an onus on the owner who has to appoint under that. And owner has to give an affidavit to that effect at the time of application that he has appointed a qualified registered professional. Now, in case there is a red tapeism in that, there are also problems of in between there are professionals change. It is necessary for the owner to appoint another one, and during the process of that, he need not have to continue the development. Now, most of the time, the responsibility which is taken by the engineer or a structural engineer or the architect for following the regulations, for having followed all the requirements under the regulations. The owner as well as the professional are responsible through an affidavit and a compulsory letter of appointment to be issued. In case he changes, It is incumbent upon the owner to inform the authorities that he is changing, and the changed architect or a consultant needs to be brought on record. And another interesting part is all these regulations are linked to the provisions under RPG 21. Now, I was talking about post-occupancy audit. How does it benefit either the citizens or the authorities is an interesting subject here. Now, if you make any development, after the occupancy certificate is obtained by the local body and the developer walks out, contractor walks out. But after that, what happens to the general provisions of like parking places, basements, stilt areas, and the like? Sometimes the balconies, something happens. I'm sure you know what happens subsequently to getting an occupancy. Now, this provision provides opportunity and powers to the local bodies or any authorities to audit those buildings even after an occupancy certificate is given officially. Earlier, it was done only on a complaint by somebody. But now the provisions provide authorities to the local bodies where they can enter any of this property on an inspection on their own or through complaint or otherwise, and take action as even though occupancy certificate is issued. This building definition, I think I'll skip that. These are the things which are covered under the building. I won't get into the details of this particular thing. High-rise building is one which is always a contention of debate and discussions and all that happens, because Goa particularly is something which is an undulating topography. Now, if you start a building on down and you have road at the second floor level, sometimes first floor level, and now from how to consider that height of the building, whether it is from the lower side or the higher side, many buildings are, if you go by the 0 to 25 meter slope, and it's a slope, undulating permissible slope, of course. Now within this, now one floor start from the other side and the other. Now there used to be a big confusion on this. Now we have clarified that particular thing, how to measure a structure and the height of the building. Now high-rise building has been 15 meters earlier, and now also it is 15 meters. The only difference is it is not from the adjoining ground level, but this top of the stilt is taken to the eaves or the last slab. Now, I was talking about the introduction of structural engineer. If you remember when I said during the definitions, I said I'm going to talk on this particular thing and its responsibility. Now, earlier it was only an engineer, irrespective of the size of the structure, height of the structure, or the volume of the building. Now, this particular regulation separates out the necessity of bringing a structural engineer on board for buildings which are above 15 meters in height. We call them high-rise buildings, and now it is necessary that structural engineer, there are some extra qualifications for structural engineer, experiences and all that, and he is supposed to give a certificate at the time of submitting the plans. I repeat here, structural liability certificate is submitted at the time of making an application to the authorities by the owner or the professional. Now this one will have to say that he has followed required codes under National Building Code, which are also reflected in our enclosures in the regulation. And he also takes the responsibility that yes, I have designed this one, I'm responsible for any design and the development and construction of this. And at the end of the construction being complete, he also has to give a structural stability certificate that he has certified that the structure which he has designed, executed, has followed all the procedures. This particular certificate is also available in the annexure if you go to that. So this is a thing which makes responsibility for a professional to execute his work with proper codes being followed. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the moment a PDA or the TCP gives a technical order or a clearance or an NOC, it does not amount to a lot of things. There are a lot of confusions, a lot of, what is it called? complaints we used to take. A lot of people had debated on that one also. Why that NOC and this one is given when it does not cover many things. These are all the things which are down if you see ABCD. Title and interest of the holder of the permission to relevant land or the building or both is not guaranteed with the approval of NOC or technical clearance by the department. It also does not confirm boundaries of the relevant site for which permission has been obtained. Any easement thereon or therefrom on that particular plot also is not confirmed by virtue of issuing an order. Then structural or engineering safety is again as per the affidavit submitted by the owner and the engineer or a structural engineer. Now, this is the scope of the completion order. This is another area where citizens have always a clash of understanding. Now, once a completion order is given, that only confirms what is written in red color. It is the FAR, coverage, setbacks as per the approved plan, height and projections of the building. This does not include compound unless it is included in the plan, either a part or full. Now, these are the responsibilities which I had mentioned earlier also. If a professional disassociates with the development, it shall be the responsibility of the professional to intimate to the competent authority of such decision in writing. And the competent authority immediately requires the owner to appoint another qualified person. Owner and new appointee shall intimate the competent authority in writing jointly. If you see this was not there in the previous one, and there used to be a sort of a shifting of responsibility from one to the other. There used to be a change of more than 2 to 3 professionals for whatever reasons, I don't get into that, during the lifetime of a project. From starting to the ending, sometimes 3 to 4 people have changed. Now, who should be held responsible and from which date? There never used to be a conflict. There are many people who have landed up in courts, and courts also unable to fix competence of or responsibility to anyone. By bringing this particular thing, we have tried to put things on record that from which date, who is responsible, and how much owner is also responsible in executing a project. He can't fully rely only on that. Onus is on him to ensure a professional is brought on record. This is a thing which, if you look at from the perspective of falling buildings and violations on the sites and all that, each one keeps blaming one another. But now these provisions on record in writing makes it a sort of responsibility fixing for both owner as well as, and of course, the competent authorities also. Now they cannot escape by saying we don't know what happened to them. Now they are supposed to be part of the entire process of appointing, shifting, and obtaining that particular thing also. All the 3 authorities, the owner of development and the professionals, are duty bound and fixed on this joint responsibility. Structural design. After Kanakana building collapsed, there were a lot of debates on who is supposed to be checking the structural designs. Now, if you look at what I was mentioning earlier, the TCP doesn't go to check that. This has to be generally checked, foundation, the elements of masonry, timber, plane, all this, by the local bodies engineer, municipal engineers we call it, or PWD engineers if it is other than municipalities. This is a brief regarding the regulations which are there. I would keep the floor open for discussion so that more and more clarifications can be given on this. Her question is, how do we speed up the process of framing regulations to protect Goa's heritage under the said act? We have already have a conservation regulation. If we are talking about only heritage regulations, we need to actually process. I think it can be done, but it will take at least 6 months period to do that. But I don't think they have initiated anything on that. All that what we have been dealing with all heritage structures is on conservation regulations which are part of these regulations. The next question is that how does the Heritage Conservation Committee get the necessary authority to enforce the said act more vigorously? Also, has heritage been included or defined in the new list of definitions? Conservation is defined. I'm not sure whether heritage is defined. What we have is not a Heritage Conservation Committee. We have got Conservation Committee, which also takes care of heritage buildings or conservation buildings. And I'm not sure what exactly the additional requirements done. Now, if I remember something in the past, through our Charles Correa Foundation, we had tried to do creating some areas of elements and vocabulary of elements on each zone. We had some 10 zones, 8 to 10 zones which were created in Panjim Conservation Area. And a report was also submitted. And the chief architect at that time was also a member. Our Charles Correa Foundation was the one which was roped in to do that particular thing. And I don't know exactly whether they have taken the same thing further or it is only at that initial submission stage. Next question is from Karan to everyone. On what criteria will the village panchayat grant or not grant construction license? Do those who cannot afford a registered architect also have to employ one? As of now, as per the regulation, yes. It is necessary to employ one because he has to be professionally guiding the persons required. This opens a scope. I'm going beyond the answer which is there. Someone can start some kind of consultancy on this and take care of those who cannot afford. Now, in fact, though I'm not committing, it is in my mind to do something of that nature, wherein my institute can start, where I've just initiated something, can get into this mode of helping those who are in need, who can't afford a professional. The next question from Heta Pandit. Has TDR been introduced to protect heritage properties and sites or something else? TDR was actually discussed and introduced not just for heritage buildings like in Bombay and all that. We are more focused into heritage buildings and their TDR to be transferred. But in the state of Goa, it was supposed to go much beyond that because there are many people other than the conservation areas or heritage buildings. Even the people who lose lands along the highways or the roads for acquisition, there are public open spaces and green spaces and reservations done for public utilities and other things in the plans. We were supposed to include all this into that so that there is no need for someone to force a change in the zoning. Now today what is happening is people go for change in zone only because their land is non-developable or proposed for acquisition or reserved for some public utility. Now, if he is not given a proper compensation or a TDR, he will certainly go on trying his level best to ensure that the zone is changed. That's a conflict always with the plans approved. In fact, that doesn't allow plans to be finalized at all. Now, if a TDR is allowed for such kind of uses, that can actually provide a free, decision making for any owner of the land whose land is not developable by him, but reserved for many other public utilities. So that was supposed to go much beyond that. I'm not sure exactly where that has reached now. The next question is current to everyone. How often are these post-occupancy audits conducted by local bodies? Frankly speaking, I have no data on this and I'm not sure whether how rigorously that is being taken. If I make a statement, I don't think more than 5 to 10% local bodies must have used that on their own. This is an area where there is a serious necessity to, what I should call it, trigger the local bodies to take the responsibility to do that. The next question is Ankit Singh. Why new construction buildings gives floor marking as stilt parking, lower ground, upper ground, ground and so on? These are different categories of buildings, floors. Now, when a thing is below the ground, it is normally talked as underground. Now, in the slopy areas, sometimes, as I told you earlier also, a building cannot be one thing. Like you take an example of Altino. when you are going to Altino, that road sometimes come to the first or second floor when a building starts from the down. Now from down road, from any side which you approach, it is a ground floor, and when you are on the other side, it becomes this one. So avoid that kind of a confusion, they said the lower one is called a lower ground, or if it is covering more than 2/3 or 3/4, that will be treated as a basement. If not, if it is open on two sides, it is on the lower side of the floor, the hill, it is treated as lower, then they call it upper ground. Stilt, of course, doesn't require any explanation. Anywhere it is built which is a stilt open on all the sides is always considered as a stilt. The next question is Rui Pereira. Can a high-rise building be built on an urban plot in a commercial C2 zone less than 500 square meters? Answer is yes. If a zone is C2, he has to only follow the setbacks required and he can build. He will be restricted from going high-rise only because of setbacks which are compulsory to be followed in a smaller plot. If this question was intended to say whether that can be built in a smaller place, there is no specific provision to identify what should be the plot size for each this one. So that particular thing is missing. In fact, for any C1 and C2 zones, in my opinion, we should have a minimum size of plot including proper dimensions. Then only actually you can build a proper building. But as of now, that provision is not there in the regulation. Again, next question is Karan. What are the penalties if a building is occupied without obtaining a completion certificate? This refers to the powers and provisions of regulation, municipal regulations or the panchayat regulations.
Okay, so I'm going to read the question. If a building is about to collapse, who will check the structural stability? Who is responsible?
It is actually it comes under the municipal acts, municipal regulation. Municipal act talks about the structural stability of old buildings, and it is the municipality which has to take initiative in that.
So if something serious happens, the municipality is responsible.
That's it.
What you are saying.
Initiative has to be taken by the municipality to rectify that.
If it is the panchayat, it will be the responsibility of the panchayat.
That will be the panchayat, also being a local body, can refer such buildings are there, but the responsibility of structural stability to be assessed is by the PWD.
But why you are thinking that there is no structural stability problem in the villages?
No, structural stability problems are there.
How?
Everywhere they are there. Now I am talking about two things. One is the old structures which have the problems, which Atha Pandit is talking about. And the other one is the new structures where we are talking about the structural stability of the new structures being constructed. Now for the new structure, the structural engineer on board is responsible. Whereas for the old structures, it is through either on its own or otherwise the local body concerned. In the municipality will have their own engineers to assess. In the panchayat areas, panchayat has to refer such kind of things to the PWD of the government and take its assessment done.
I'll repeat the question.
No, I think I understand that. You are saying the TCP Act and the regulations, whether they have achieved their objectives or not.
Yes.
It's a relative assessment. It's extremely difficult to comment on that. There are success stories and of course there are limited failures also.
So you don't see any need for any changes?
Changes in a dynamic society is always there. Development and process of development is never a static aspect. And the issues connected to this is also not static. Issues keeps coming. The improvement of regulations and the act is a continuous process. It cannot be static.
Okay, but let me refine that argument a little bit more on behalf of the questioner. If you take the development regulation, earlier commercials was allowed in only 5% of residential buildings. Then the building regulations were amended and now there is no limit on commercial in residential buildings. Now this is only involved, to my knowledge, in all other parts of the world, not only in India, all other parts of the world, commercial is restricted to 5% to the maximum 10%. Today you are having buildings which
Now, I agree to this particular observation what you have made. If a place is reserved, and that should actually be used for commercial purposes. What is happening in the state of Goa is that people want because they wanted higher FAR, they ask for commercial and build residential, which is, according to me, is not proper, if I say in short. In fact, if you remember, when these new regulations in 2010 were notified, this provision was brought in. Then there was headline. This particular thing of if it is a commercial zone, only commercial structure, at least 75% has to be commercial. That was a provision which was made. But that was subsequently, after a hue and cry, withdrawn in the revisions made. It was there in this new regulation.
But hue and cry from whom? It could only be architects and developers and real estate. It would not be ordinary people who don't know very much about these things. It's all the professional people who raise the hue and cry. What's the beneficial to them? Commercial building in a residential area, and other than commercial, he put up 2 extra floors.
On this point, I fully agree with you. If you see the first notification, it was there, and I still stand by that. And that there is a need to do in confirming to zones, and the use should be as per the plan zone.
Anyway, we have challenged that in the petition. Let's go to the next question. If a professional withdraws from a project,
Yes.
he or she normally informs the owner. Is it not the duty of the owner to inform the concerned authority?
I think I have already answered this also during my presentation. It is compulsory on the part of the owner to inform the authorities immediately, and also to appoint a new one if he is continuing with the project. It is necessary for the owner to inform.
What is the difference between land cutting and hill cutting?
There is a difference between land cutting and hill cutting, though both are lands, but hill is different. And in case it is not a hill, like suppose a plateau they are digging for basements or whatever, that's a land cutting. Suppose take example in the flat area of Porvorim, someone, like I had received a complaint once next to what is that place, in that circle which is there, where that road which goes to journalist colony, where some motorcycle this one, when that particular thing was dug for creating basement, this issue was raised by someone. Now that is a land cutting, whereas that is not a hill, it's a land. So anything which is cut in a plain area, which is not endangering any other land, hills or mountains or anything which has a potentiality to fall by virtue of this, is different than just land cutting.
Who is responsible for checking ownership title documents for a plot for which development permission is sought? How does one ensure that documents are not false? This question is from Alvin, sitting here in the office.
I think I had mentioned in one of the slides which I showed about responsibility of NOC and what it constitutes or what it covers when an NOC is given by the TCP or the PDA. And it is very clear it does not cover the title and the title deeds and the veracity of that ownership of that. And that actually finds itself in the NOCs in the conditions that the local body is supposed to verify the veracity of those documents claimed by the people.
Before granting the
Construction license. And that's why I made it very clear, NOC under TCP Act or regulations by the PDA or the TCP does not constitute or give any powers to anyone to go and construct it on the ground unless they obtain a license under the Local Bodies Act. Because what happens if a document is forged or otherwise, we have no scope of verification of that. It is the function of Land Revenue Code. At that time it is very difficult. Even if you ask me, the local bodies also can rely only on the certificate submitted. Unless challenged, the ownership is ownership. That Revenue Department only says that. Unless it is challenged, you are the owner of that if you are in possession of that. Authenticity of the document. Authenticity of the document. Otherwise, like even 114 form, where my name enters in some document, is not final. If no one challenges, yes, it remains. I mean, I'm not saying this. This is what, when we talked about this during some discussions, revenue authorities says that. because any property's ownership can keep on changing. There is no limit for changing one owner to the other. So when somebody has changed, and what is the process followed, what is the mutation process followed, and who is actually in possession, who is actually on record, this is something which is beyond the planner's jurisdiction to get into details. We basically rely on the first submission made, and the local bodies are expected to do a little more beyond that, and by issuing that.
Next question. When there is a town and country planning department, why are some areas often taken out and demarcated as PDAs?
It's a political decision. I don't think I should be commenting on that. I would refrain from commenting on that. If you ask me the technical definition of how to delineate, there is a procedure for delineating, and there has to be certain characters when we form a planning area. The area which is adjoining or joining has to have characteristics of relationship with the core. The core and the periphery, that is a concept which is there. So this is the basic knowledge of making that, which we are taught. But here, I don't think most of those decisions fall into that.
Panchayat areas are being stolen by PDAs in violation of the Panchayat Raj Act. Can you specifically answer this question?
Let me give you a brief, more or less you have explained. Yeah. The first planning areas were started in the 80s, first 80s after the Act came into picture. 76, 78, 1980 was the first Planning and Development Authority, PNGM and all that. Now these PDAs had covered most of the Appendix A villages. You must be knowing something called earlier Appendix A villages, which were having high growth rate, were included. By virtue of this, half of Bardes, half of Tiswadi Taluka used to be part of the PDA. And many of them were outgrowths. If you see, we are almost 70% urbanization. Most of these places, though they are in rural areas under Panchayat, they are urban in nature. As far as census classification, most of them are called urban growth centers. Now these growth centers are brought in over a period of time as and when they are included. Even for example, Kalangut Kanduli comes under that. Most of Porvorim village panchayats which are there comes under that. Even around PNGM, including the old Goa and all surrounding areas, are identified as urban areas in census. Now by virtue of this, over a period of time, they have initiated to include those things. But in 1992-93, when this constitutional amendment came, and then government of Goa also introduced Panchayat Raj Act, there was a decision by the government to exclude non-municipal areas from all the PDAs. Now that was a decision in order to give more scope and this one in planning and decision making for the local bodies. That was no doubt a good decision. And as of now, probably the process remains the same, except certain areas like Chikali is included into Mormugao planning area. I think in Tiswadi also some outgrowths around this one, and Kalangut Kandoli, which was also an urban as per census, have been included into some of the municipal areas. After that they have split, that is another political decision on that. But otherwise these are growing urban areas which are connected to cities. Then in order to cut down the number of PDAs, earlier if you remember there used to be one PDA in Ponda, one in Mapsa, and in many other places. So cut down that one, like some of the PDAs and municipal, that provision of merging two planning areas is available under the Act. There is no problem with that. Any number of urban areas, but of course it may not satisfy the contiguity requirement which is there. Like PNGM was given charge of Mapsa as an additional area, and merging two planning areas to some extent, barring contiguity, is available under the acts. So that to that extent it is not. But I can't comment on the frequent splits and frequent additions and deletions. Okay.
Old Goa comes under UNESCO Heritage Act. Then how come potentially disastrous Mangini garbage plant is given permission to be installed in this eco-sensitive heritage zone? That's the beginning question.
This site was there earlier, selected much earlier. And if you see the distance from there, I think distance is quite sufficient. They have also provided buffer zone around that place. It's not adjoining to that. And at the same time, what is conceived there. If I'm not standing here to support that. What I understand from there, it is not a garbage dumping site. It is a garbage treatment plant. Now, treatment plants are different from the earlier concept of what we used to understand means it is something very dirty. But here, after 1.5 kilometer distance from that boundary of the old Goa, if that plant can be scientifically handled, there should not be a problem, in my opinion. Like we had initially Saligaon plant also. I mean, to some extent, that is taking care of the problems which were otherwise earlier there. Because I was one of that who visited that site was so bad.
Next question from Rui Pereira. If the frontal width of the existing road is less than 8 meters in commercial zones of urban areas, can a building plan be passed by the PDA on a proposed road of 10 meters next to heritage buildings?
There are two elements in this question. I'll leave aside that heritage part first. I'll take on that one. A commercial building is permissible on an 8-meter road. Proposed 10 meter is nothing. Forget about proposed 10 meters. Even on an 8-meter road, it is possible to allow in a commercial zone. Right? 10 meter is used for maintaining a setback. And that is a proposed right of way where a person is pushed back by using 10 meter right of way. If you say, like, suppose it is only 8 meter, then he will end up with 4 meter plus 3 meters, for example. If we say 10 meter right of way, he has to have 5 plus 3. And over a period of time, in the proposed road which is there, the entire alignment gets into 5 plus 3 instead of 4 plus 3. But the next question is that heritage thing, that again now that will be treated as if a heritage structure is there, the building, if it is coming under the heritage zone or conservation zone, what we call it, then that automatically goes into conservation category. But there could be a possibility where the road is a dividing factor, left side is in heritage area and the right side of the road is in non-conservation zone. There are issues in such kind of conflict areas or the border areas. Because the road is only 10 meter, but that can happen. But if it is in the zone, then I don't think there should be any difficulty. That will be seen to ensure that it goes under the conservation regulations. And there are height restrictions there, FAR restrictions there, setback relaxations are there, all those things are there.
Next question. What is the rationale behind Section 16B of the Town and Country Planning Act?
Section B has undergone a little change over a period of time. Now I restrict myself to answer during where I was in service. 16B was introduced for public purposes. That was only to take care of the requirement for public utilities. Any change in zone required pending a long process of making the plan process. Like if we say that 10 years we can't make a plan or we can't revise a plan, that was coming in the way. Like regional plan, for example, sometimes it was kept on hold for a long time. Now, in public interest, public utilities and public the developments could not have been stopped in public interest again. So in order to have a scope for allowing public utilities, that 16B was brought. This is up to a period, but subsequently probably there are additions and alterations to include many more. I don't get into commenting on that particular part of it because I have not taken a full look of what has happened in that revised regulation.
How many story buildings can be built in village panchayat area? I suppose what he means is
Height.
how many stories can a building have in a village panchayat area?
It again depends on whether it is VP1 or VP2. If it is VP2. Now if it is in VP1, it is only ground plus 1. Means at least 7 meters, 7.6 meters. If it is, you can't go beyond 9 meters, including stilt. That means you will get only the upper ground and this one. If it is VP2, 1 category, then he can have ground plus 2. This is again in areas which were not the PD areas. Suppose take example of Porvori. Porvori comes under village panchayat, but basically it was an ODP area. There the old ODP provisions were applied even in the regional plan. We have brought in whatever was there in the ODP, old ODP, and those provisions remains there in the boundary which was in the old ODP area. But beyond that, it is the same 9 meter for VP1, VP2, sorry, and ground plus 2 for VP1.
Yeah, why are section 17A complaints rarely rectified by the town and country planning department? And I have seen this also personally.
17A.
Complaints under section 17A for somebody doing illegal hill cutting or illegal paddy filling. The town and country planning department never seemed to be enthusiastic about looking into those complaints.
What I'm saying is the process of dealing with that, when a complaint or any such reference comes, either on their own or by any citizen, the team is there which is supposed to visit even on Saturdays, Sundays, 24/7. There is a contact number also 1077, and then there is a team headed by deputy collectors, TCP officials, and survey department and the police, who normally visit the site and issue a notice for such kind of persons to give details within 48 hours. Now, failing any submission within 48 hours, now they will have to go and file an FIR if it is an unauthorized development and no permissions are given. And the same thing is not notified or displayed on the site. Now, the moment it is filed before the police, that investigation gets into police mode. Now, police is supposed to carry out the investigation and submit the same thing before a court of law, for which there is again section 124 of the TCP Act, under which they are supposed to submit a report for prosecution sanction. Now, this prosecution sanction is to be given by either the chief town planner or the senior town planners of the respective districts. Now, once that is given, the matter goes before the court of law, and then the trial starts. Now, there are two stages in which the delay takes place. One is from the FIR time to prosecution. This takes a lot of time, and once that is done, it is difficult for us to interfere with that. It is the police which has to verify and come back with that. And then after prosecution sanction is given under section 44, the matter takes its own time. You are aware of that before a court of law. And in short, if the effective implementation of that is not satisfactory.
We can see on the state highway multi-story buildings built in village panchayat of Pulgam, Bisholi. Is this permissible?
That particular location you have to see whether it is outside the municipality or inside the municipality, because that boundary comes somewhere around that to the municipality. Picholi municipal boundary comes, it looks like a village, but boundary comes up to that. You have to see whether it is inside or outside. If it is outside, it may not be correct. If it is within the municipality, then that could be probably within the law. I don't know exactly which building you are referring. I am saying there is a area which you need to define which is on municipality and which is not in that Mulgaon section.
A housing society in Panji had issues with the structure of their 40-plus-year-old building. So they wish to go for redevelopment. The first thing needed was building inspection by a structural engineer. When the committee applied for the appointment of a structural engineer from the CCP, they were told the CCP did not have a structural engineer. So what is the next course of action for the housing society?
Housing society can appoint a structural engineer who is registered with the Town and Country Planning Act department. There is a list of structural engineers registered with the TCP department. It's also available on website, this department website. They can appoint any one of them, and that will be valid whatever he submits.
Why has the Town and Country Planning issued a notification making 50 units and above to have STP when the Goa Pollution Control Board has said 24 and above?
I think I understand that. We have sorted out that issue, and this was a problem earlier, even when I was there, and we have amended this particular thing. Now both will have one only.
So what is the limit now? 24 or 50?
Probably it is they have agreed for 50. I'm not sure on that, but we have sorted out that to make it one of them. I think it should be 50. I'll tell you why our argument was for 50. The reason is that even for a successful running of a treatment plant, you require minimum amount of water, the sewage. Now, if you see most of our projects, 40% is not occupied. Now, if you remove 35 to 40% non-occupancy of any project throughout Goa, there are people who have invested and kept there. Now, it effectively comes to 25 to 30 units only. Now, to make it technically feasible to run that, otherwise the system itself goes for a toss. So, in view of that one, this particular thing was taken for 50. Effectively, in most of the places, it would amount to 25 to 30 actually. So you need, I think you are aware of that. So we require minimum amount of water to run each system which is there.
Why are contour plans not made available to the public?
Contour plans are available. Contour plans are initially they used to be restricted plans.
Are available. Arturo. Next question. When changes are made to the regional plan, is the regional plan updated and is the updated regional plan available online?
The cloud, contour plans are not available. Contour plans are not available to the public. I've been told.
Contour plans are Survey of India plans, and the authority which can allow that one to be used is that I am told it is available in their website also.
Yeah. Anyway, right now we cannot answer this question. Yeah. When changes are made to the regional plan, is the regional plan updated and is the updated regional plan available online?
Earlier the draft was there, and I don't know what is the current situation. After this plan was finally approved last year or a little more than 1 year, that was supposed to, once it was finally approved and released, that was to be put on website of this department.
One question here which I think you have already answered is rainwater harvesting compulsory for residential developments with more than 24 units.
No, I think it is 40 or 50 units.
Huh?
That I think it was there in the presentation only.
In the regulation it states what's the number of units.
Yes, yes.
But they have asked for 24 units. But I suppose it's in the best interest of every building, whether 10 units or 24 units, to put up a water harvesting facility. It doesn't cost anything excess, isn't it?
No, the plot size has to be, in my opinion, sufficient enough to get that water.
Okay. But with the type of rain we saw in the last week, even if you have a very small plot,
You can get maximum water.
For quite some time. And if not in your plot, at least in the adjoining plot or in the whole groundwater of the village, at least the water would have been through. Okay. In Kankoli, we have a ground plus 8. How is that justified?
I have no idea on that particular development. Ground plus 8 is virtually C1 zone. They have an ODP. If they have adopted ODP and made it into C1 zone, under that draft ODP, they must have permitted that.
No, there was only one final question which said that in Kankoli there is a structure of 8-story building. So is that permitted or not? And how was it permitted in Kankoli?
I don't know when it was permitted, But this Kandoli Kalangut was under ODP, draft ODP. Now under draft ODP, they must have released C1 zone. I'm just trying to understand how that must have been given approval. So under the draft ODP, probably which is before the court, they must have considered that as a C1 zone. Only in C1 zone you can have 8 floors.
But how do you operate a plan on the basis of a draft ODP?
I think that you have challenged that before a court, if I understand correctly. There was an issue or a question related to the affordability of professionals by some people. I am ready to do something on that wherein those who cannot afford can get free consultancy in my office. We can do something on that. We will have a different discussion on that, how to do that, and this one. Because I also have an office in Panjim. Sometimes, of course, these days difficult to reach here because of pandemic. But otherwise, I would like to give the services for those who are in need, in assisting them for doing something. And also we might even, we must be having some like-minded architects who can also sign to that. We could provide that kind of an opportunity and a sort of, public health without charging anything. So you can think of that, and then we can crystallize this idea and put something, and wherein I'm ready to allow my office and my time also to the extent. And if some like-minded consultants also can involve in that, we could start a free service to the needy.
But the offer that you're making, I think that you will look very seriously at this, and also, as you said, you've got people, they're doing this also with the legal community, where we try to get some lawyers to get out of this, money-mindedness and argue cases freely for people, not just needy people sometimes, but also for environment cases, because these things all cost money. And so what you're suggesting for architects also, for consultants, for helping villages to reach all.
Including me, my services also would be free for advising them whatever, how to go about. Then for signatures, we need to register somebody, so we can also involve them who are ready to do that. So we can create this kind of a platform for the needy Goans. I think that can take a long way to help them also.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for giving an opportunity. I think.